Good morning, everyone. I'm so glad you're here with us at this year's Georgia Technology Summit. As you can tell already this morning, we have an amazing program in store for you today. I trust that you will be inspired, encouraged, and motivated as you hear from many of Georgia's technology leaders and how they use technology and innovation to help drive high-performing teams. And now it is my distinct honor and privilege to introduce Atlanta's 61st Mayor, the Honorable Andre Dickens. Mayor Dickens is a proud native of Atlanta and a product of Atlanta Public Schools. He served on the Atlanta City Council for 8 years before running for mayor in 2021. He also is no stranger to Georgia's vast technology ecosystem. For over a decade, Mayor Dickens was an entrepreneur in both the private and nonprofit sectors and a leader in Atlanta's tech sector. Mayor Dickens also served as the Chief Development Officer for TechBridge, a nonprofit that drives community impact by bringing affordable technology and business expertise to other nonprofit organizations. Additionally, in 2018, Mayor Dickens co-founded the Technology Career Program, a free program designed to help prepare unemployed individuals and individuals experiencing disadvantage in the workplace for a career in the growing technology job market. Mayor Dickens shared his vision for Atlanta in his first State of the City address last year that addressed one city with one bright future. As Mayor Dickens says, Atlanta is a group project. A city of safe, healthy, connected neighborhoods with an expansive culture of equity, empowering upward mobility and full participation for all residents, embracing youth development and innovative, dependable government, moving Atlanta forward together. Mayor Dickens is a strong leader with many legislative and policy accomplishments. The Technology Association of Georgia is especially thankful for all his efforts that help to advance opportunity, growth, and innovation together to increase access and opportunity to our diverse technology workforce. A graduate of Mays High School, Mayor Dickens holds a bachelor's degree in chemical engineering from the Georgia Institute of Technology and a master's degree in public administration from Georgia State University. He enjoys spending time with his daughter, live music experiences, attending church, and traveling the world. And of course, an avid supporter of all Atlanta sports teams. Sorry about the Hawks. Please join me in welcoming to the stage a friend, a mentor, a frat brother, and our great mayor, the Honorable Mayor Andre Dickens.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Good morning. And thank you for that introduction, Brian. And it's good to see each and every last one of you here today. Also, you'll be joined by my senior technology advisor, Donnie Beamer. He's here today. He's a position I created recently just for developing and pushing and evangelizing about the Atlanta ecosystem in technology. I'm thrilled to join you and welcome you to all of you that have traveled from around the state here to Atlanta. Atlanta is one of the country's most innovative places for technology, and it's the nation's fastest growing high-tech sector. More than 10,000 technology companies have a presence right here in Metro Atlanta. Here in Atlanta, we remain committed to the technology ecosystem. We plan to do that by, among other things, continuing our efforts in innovation and advancing our smart city initiatives. There are many things that make our area so appealing to companies to come, including our resiliency. Metro Atlanta is the number 6 region in the country for technology degrees awarded. Many of these degrees come from my alma mater, Georgia Tech, which is one of the country's premier schools for computer science and for engineering degrees. Georgia Tech is just one of the more than 50 colleges and universities that are found in North Georgia's region. Last year, Georgia had $2.25 billion in venture capital funding, following a record-setting $4 billion in funding in 2021. In addition to the colleges and venture capital funding, our 29-county region has more than 30 corporate innovation centers, more than 150 public companies, and more than 150 digital media companies, as well as a diversity of talent that includes the second highest Black population in the country with a bachelor's degree. It is not enough, though, for us to just have these tech companies represented here. We would like to see every area of the city benefit and more of our residents to be able to benefit from these technology companies. We want to make sure that we are preparing our local workforce to fulfill and fill these jobs that are with these tech companies. And we want to get more of our young people involved in technology. So this year, 2023, I have declared it the Year of the Youth in the city of Atlanta, and we are working to help eliminate any digital divide that exists in our city. We're even engaging our school system to provide pathways that prepare our students for tech careers. So we will continue to recruit technology companies and venture capital companies, venture capital investment. I was just out west last week with Donnie and with Larry and others from Technology Association of Georgia. We went to Silicon Valley and made the case for more investment in Atlanta. That was my second trip. Each year I go there to make sure I talk to private equity, venture capitalists, et cetera. And we want to have them continue to support our corporate innovation hubs and continue our reign as the tech capital of the South. That's just one of the ways we are keeping moving Atlanta forward. Thank you for letting me join you this morning, and good luck with today's summit. Thank you.
Please welcome to the stage CEO and founder of Leapfrog Services and TAG board member Claire Yum Arnold.
Good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure to introduce Shayan Hussain, who's been a great friend to TAG and the Georgia Technology Summit in providing a comprehensive economic overview and outlook. Shayan is a managing director of BlackRock, Inc., and a member of the multi-sector fixed income product strategy team for global fixed income. He's responsible for developing the taxable fixed income platform and providing a link between the investment teams and client groups. Also, as a senior product manager or strategist, he's dedicated to all of the firm's multi-sector mutual fund offerings. Shayan joined BlackRock in 2009, playing a significant role in the development of the firm's multi-sector products. By working closely with investors across both retail and institutional channels. His time with them includes working in the London office to launch their global fixed income product across EMEA, Asia, and Latin America. Prior to joining BlackRock, Shayan was a trader on the U.S. interest rates swap desk at J.P. Morgan, and he started his career in corporate finance at AT&T. Shayan earned an MBA from Columbia Business School and a BS in Business Administration and a BA in Economics, cum laude, from Boston University. He lives in Atlanta with his 2 children and his wife, who's a proud Delta executive, and he currently serves on the board of Atlanta's Skyline Trail. Please join me in welcoming Shayan.
Thank you very much. Good morning. It's not often you get to follow the mayor in speaking, so thank you everyone very much for having me here, for having BlackRock here. This is actually my 3rd year presenting at the TAG conference, so Thank you to Larry, thank you to Ron, thank you to everyone at TAG for being so welcoming and inviting me here. And actually, interesting story, it's only my 4th year here in Atlanta, so I moved down 4 years ago after a lifelong in the Northeast in New York City, and I was talking backstage, I'm never going back to New York City, so I love it down here. I kind of got a taste of the good life. So a lot of good stuff going on, and I've been asked to summarize what's happening in the global macro environment in 20 minutes. So I'm going to take a stab at doing exactly that. If you could put up the slides, that would be helpful. So like I was sitting down while Alicia was talking. I was taking furious notes because I am a aspiring futurist myself, because the world is absolutely changing at a dramatic pace. And I can tell you, having a seat at BlackRock, having a front seat to the global financial markets and the evolution of the financial markets, it really is astounding what's taking place. And at BlackRock, a lot of what we do is think about exactly that and how we infuse and advance the field of investment management by adapting to and infusing technology into our processes. Whether it's integrating large data sets into investment management processes, whether it's monitoring psychological behaviors of our investors. There's so much data that can be extracted. And interestingly enough, if you think about just the last few weeks, we had a pretty momentous occasion in the sense of the history of the financial markets as it relates to technology, where we had the first run on the bank that actually took place on Twitter. Right? So usually a run on the bank, there's a line outside the bank, and you say, okay, there's an issue here. Silicon Valley Bank, there's no line. The line took place online on Twitter, and in a matter of minutes, that bank completely went under. So it really is fascinating, and to Alicia's point, going from exponential to quantum, that was without a doubt a quantum move. And so there's a lot of change underway. There's a lot of, I'd say, imbalance, if you will, between the financial system, between policy, and a lot of that's being figured out while technology moves at a quantum pace. So that being said, I could go on and on that topic. A lot of really amazing stuff going on. So just to pull up the slides, let's dig into the global outlook and what we're thinking. So I was here last year, and I presented this framework around how to think about the outlook for 2022. And put up the simple 4-quadrant analysis, and on the y-axis represents equities, so good or bad. On the bottom, on the x-axis is bonds, whether positive or negative. Another way to think about it, on the right-hand side of the chart is inflationary. On the left-hand side, rather, is inflationary. On the right-hand side is disinflationary. On the top is growth. On the bottom is contraction or recession. And the idea that we put forward last year is that you actually had an economy that was in a pretty healthy spot, in the sense of a very healthy consumer, very healthy kind of household in terms of leverage in the system, in terms of balance sheets, income, interest expense relative to income. You look at the health of corporate balance sheets, and I would argue even our banking system, although I'll get into that topic as well, that the economy was actually in a pretty healthy spot, the housing market as well, in a healthy spot to withstand what was just on the precipice of a historic tightening of monetary policy by the Fed. And the worst case scenario on the bottom left-hand quadrant, which is the slamming the brakes scenario, i.e. the Fed saying, whoa, 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 inflation's getting out of control. We need to raise rates at the literally fastest pace that we've ever seen to get inflation under control. And so what did we see transpire last year, as Ron actually suggests I do this, so, give myself a kind of a rating on what we kind of presented last year. It's interesting. I would say we fell slightly more into the slamming the brakes category, where you had the Fed really tighten policy, raise rates at a historic pace, really we haven't seen since the 1990s. And we moved into an environment where global capital markets came under pressure, whether it's stocks, whether it's bonds. There really was nowhere to hide outside of cash. The interesting thing within that context, the economy actually held up quite well. You actually had jobs printing at a historic level. You had wage growth. From an economic perspective, economic activity actually had a tremendous rebound in consumption and growth coming off the back of the COVID shock. So despite the volatility in capital markets, you had an economy that held up. So I'd rate myself at right around maybe a B or so, or maybe I'll be a little more generous, B+. But just saying, I think we're moving in the right direction. I'd say our thesis still holds in the sense of an economy that's actually in a pretty healthy spot and continues to be, where you look at previous economic cycles, you don't have elevated levels of leverage, elevated excesses in the system necessarily, and you have still a healthy job growth. So that's what I'm going to get into. So that's kind of where we were and where we see ourselves going, for the remainder of the year. So let's dig into more detail. And actually, one point I'd like to make, when I think about the outlook for last year versus kind of what actually transpired, what was the variable that was introduced that threw a wrench into the mix and pushed us into that slamming the brakes category? A lot of that centered around the war in Ukraine. So you had this very unique set of kind of combined factors where you had massive fiscal stimulus off the back of COVID. You had the war in Ukraine, you had a shortage in energy, shortage in food, and this kind of massive spike in inflation, and the Fed's hand forced to do what it had to do to get inflation under control. So I say this all to say, this is also, it's an interesting time to present an economic outlook because the Federal Reserve is actually meeting today. So you're actually going to find out today whether I'm right or wrong. So you'll have immediate gratification on that outlook. So it's interesting to present in the morning of the Fed. So let's dig into kind of where we've moved. So on this chart, we talked about this topic of living with inflation. And this idea that we are moving into a different regime, and that's something that Alicia talked about, and I'd like to build on that concept where we have exited a regime, clearly. The last decade plus was a regime associated with lower levels of interest rates, lower levels of inflation for that matter, the Fed fighting to get inflation up to 2%. We have moved into a very different regime, a lot of that driven by the factors I've described, deglobalization, supply chain dynamics, commodity scarcity, and I would argue even labor dynamics in the United States, which creates a very different regime in the sense of actually we are going to be living in a higher inflationary environment. Now, I'm not calling for the 70s type hyperinflation, but we're not going to be talking about 2% inflation going forward. We're probably talking something in the 3% range longer term. And this creates some complications for the Fed when you think about how the economy has evolved. So the Fed obviously slammed on the brakes. And what's transpired since then, and you think about the position that the Fed is in today, so as an econ nerd, I'm really interested in how this rolls out over the course of today. But what we show on this chart is the evolution of the Fed's forecast for the end of 2023, looking at yellow inflation, their expectations for inflation, and in orange GDP growth. And as you can see here, one line's going to be higher, the other line's going to be lower. So what has the Fed been saying as they've slammed on the brakes? Well, actually, our expectations for inflation are moving higher than what they were the last quarter and the quarter before that and the quarter before that, and they've been reducing their growth expectations. So the Fed is actually in a very difficult spot today in the sense of balancing growth in the underlying economy, but that being said, growth that is slowing relative to inflation that remains elevated, but I would argue is moderating. And so the question is, does the Fed choose to live with inflation in the sense of a longer-term view that inflation is coming off peak levels, that will continue to moderate lower, and therefore we can take our foot off the brakes that they've pressed so hard? And how does that policy evolve? That's the game right here. That's kind of what this forecast and what the outlook from a macro econ perspective is really based on. So let's dig into that topic. So, what we saw transpire last year, and I would argue from the year prior coming into last year, was truly historic in nature, in the sense of the Fed raising rates at literally the fastest pace that we've seen, since the 1990s. And that, when you do something like that, when you go from 0 to 5%, short-term rates in the matter of a year, things change. Talk about a quantum pace. That is a quantum pace in the sense of macroeconomics and the Fed. Things change, right? Cash becomes more interesting. You put pressure on the banking system. This is an interesting kind of occurrence that's taken place just over the last couple of months. And it's interesting, when you look at Fed policy has recognized exactly that, which has taken place, which you have seen these cracks in the financial system, i.e. pressure, whether it's on the regional banks here in the US, whether it was Credit Suisse, which was a byproduct of what transpired. And so obviously that's brought to the fore fears of an 2008 scenario. And I won't get too deep in this topic, but I don't see that type of scenario playing out here where it isn't systemic in nature. I would argue what's taking place at the moment is largely reflective of tighter policy exposing underlying weaknesses on a company-by-company basis. And that could be across various industries. So as a graduate of Columbia, I'm partial to Warren Buffett, and I read a lot of what he says, but he has that famous saying, no one knows who's not wearing their swim trunks until the tide goes out, right? And so the tide has clearly gone out. We're finding out who's not wearing their swim trunks. And so when you look at whether it's SVB, you look at Signature Bank, and so on and so forth, there's certain, dynamics particular to their respective businesses that expose them as the tide rolled out. So when thinking about, what's transpired from a banking perspective, the Fed has to pay attention to that. And you've seen them evolve their language in that, on that basis. And I think that's how policy evolves, where the Fed kind of takes a step back from moving in such an aggressive manner. So why is that? On this chart, we just show something that's obviously very critical to the economic system and is the lifeblood of the economy, or our banking system, but inherent to that, the flow of credit and money in the system. And what this chart shows is lending standards in the United States. And it just shows the line moving higher is tighter lending standards, i.e. it's harder to get a loan, banks are lending less. Lower is easier lending standards. So banks are more free in terms of issuing credit to the economy. So the crisis, if you will, the tightness in the banking system has done a lot of the work on behalf of the Fed. So you think about the Fed's policy statement today. You saw that in the last statement where they're introducing language around saying, hey, we're going to continue to stay vigilant around inflation, but we're going to be mindful. Of the stresses in the financial system. And so when you think about, let's dig into what the Fed is actually looking at, and what I would argue is the reason you want to look beyond the headline numbers. So first, in terms of inflation, our view is that we have seen peak inflation, that inflation will continue to moderate. We do think that the economy is actually in a pretty healthy spot. You're going to continue to see job growth. And this chart's a really interesting story around that. When you break down inflation between goods and services, green is good, so goods you've seen massively fall off from an inflationary perspective, and in fact maybe disinflating. Services continues to inflate. So there is a dichotomy in the economy, and it's hard, that's why I kind of always warn, don't look at the headline number, let's dig in a little deeper into it. And I think this tells a really interesting story, and inherent to that story is this chart here. And when I think about, inflation, and you think about the chart that I highlighted showing the divergence between goods and services from an inflationary perspective, it all comes down to this. So let's break down our economy between goods and services and what transpired as a function of COVID, right? And the excesses, and I would argue, and the quantum moves, but the unique dynamics that have been introduced because of COVID. And so on this chart, we show real spending on goods on the left-hand side, real spending on services on the right-hand side. And what it shows is, well, in the midst of COVID, you had this massive contraction in the economy. Everything shut down. We all went home. You know the story, right? Well, manufacturing shut down as well. Well, then instantly the economy turned back on, and I would argue we were shopping in a very different manner in terms of the goods intensity of our purchases. So spending, shot back up, particularly within goods-oriented areas of the market, at a time when manufacturing was shut down, inventory is depleted. Okay, no supply-demand. That's economics. Very low supply, high demand. Inflation moves higher. So you had this goods shock in the economy, and then you see, well, manufacturing turned back on, and we kind of reached that peak in goods. This experience around COVID evolved, and you've seen goods come off that peak level. That's why goods are in deflationary mode. Now, from a services perspective, and I can attest this because I took my daughters to the Taylor Swift concert on Sunday. I can't believe how much I paid for tickets, but services, you've seen massive inflation, whether it's airline tickets, whether it's hotels, and so on and so forth. So from a services perspective, you actually had a significant contraction, but services slower to rebound, and now you're seeing this massive explosion from a services perspective. So these are all irregularities, and I would argue you look at from a services perspective, which is actually where you're seeing most of the wage inflation. Interesting things to consider. A great example, I don't know if anyone's tried to make a dentist appointment, but it's really hard to get an appointment with a dentist because short staffing, right? So it took me like, when I called to make an appointment, it was about 30 days before I could get that appointment. The short-staffed, right? So there continues to be underemployment in areas like healthcare, hospitality, education, and that's exactly where you're seeing wage inflation. And the interesting virtuous cycle that's taking place is you're actually seeing wage growth among lower income stratas, which is actually a pretty positive thing because you're actually closing the income gap. So the question for the Fed is, do you use a blunt policy tool, which is interest rates, which is targeting the financial system, and you're seeing the cracks in the financial system, to somehow in an inadvertent way affect the real economy, which when you dig into the real economy, it's actually the services portion, and within services, we're actually talking about certain areas of the market. So do you use that blunt policy tool to try to extract a very precise kind of outcome? And the reality is you can't do that. Monetary policy is very blunt in nature. So that's kind of the view in terms of where the Fed is, how policy is evolving. And I think what you'll see going forward, we're actually in this kind of soft landing camp. We don't see a deeper recessionary dynamic. Do we see a mild recession? For sure. A couple quarters of negative GDP? Okay. Unemployment will be moderately higher? For sure. But we don't see a deeper recessionary dynamic. And this is a really cool chart, and kind of build on Alicia's comments around the future and how technology is evolving. I think this would be interesting for all of you. But you look at this long-term chart, this is kind of a long-term view on recessions. And interesting to note, this is basically move lower, that's a recession, higher, the economy is doing better. And what it shows is actually the last two recessions were driven by the financial markets, i.e. excesses in the financial system. Whether leverage in the system, whether the dot-com bubble, I would argue you don't see those excesses, and actually Fed policy has actually taken those excesses out of the system. And so you got to go back to the 1990s or even the 1980s. So it's really been 30 to 40 years since we've seen the last true Econ 101 recession, which is pretty fascinating when you think about that. And why is that? I believe it does come back to technology. So technology has totally changed not only our respective industries, but it's changed the field of modern economics as well, and how economies work. So go back to the 1970s, 1980s, you had economies that are much more fixed asset intensive and therefore slower to move. Well, now you have more asset light businesses. You have businesses that are working in the cloud. You're not buying huge servers and so on and so forth. So you have companies that are a lot more flexible. And I would argue you have labor that's a lot more flexible. So for those that don't remember this, not too long ago, you had to go onto the newspaper to get a job, right? You open the newspaper and you're like, hey, if I'm looking for a job, and you circle what you want. So we somehow got these, but great example, surgeon wanted, new health clinic opening in the area, no experience needed, okay, but must have own tools. Another example, waitress must be 18 years old with 20 years of experience. Maybe hard to fill, but okay. The point being, that highlights the friction in the economic system. When you lose your job, it takes a while to find a job. Now you think about it, and y'all are front and center here. I mean, that's really not the case now. All that friction has been taken out of the economic system. A great example, there's a guy on my team, he's not here today, so I'll share the story. No one tell him that I told the story. But we were having drinks, and he admitted, he was like, when BlackRock called, a younger guy, he's like, when BlackRock called me for a job, I thought it was a crank call, because I didn't remember applying to the job. And I was like, well, tell me about that. And he's like, yeah, I just wrote a code that applied to like 1,000 different jobs, and I just sat there and I waited for someone to call. So he's like, I really didn't know who I applied to. And it just shows like, the level of flexibility and fungibility in the economic system. And so we use this analogy of a polyurethane economy. So polyurethane, as you all know, is one of the most widely used substances on Earth, valuable because of flexibility and adaptability, but also durability and strength. So to sum up that kind of economic view, yes, you've had this huge economic shock, COVID, huge economic shock in the form of the Fed. However, as I mentioned, you had an economy that was actually in a pretty healthy spot coming in, and as a function of technology and the nature and fabric of our economic system, you have an economy that's far more resilient than historical precedent would indicate. So it's tough to look into kind of historical reaction functions and how the economy has kind of shifted relative to policy. So I could go on there. I'm going to end with my comment because I think I've gone over time. So where do we sit? The charts on the right, the images on the right, for those old enough will remember, on the top you have the picture of the movie Jaws. For the bottom, those with kids will know Baby Shark. I'll not do the dance nor the song, but we're always asking as investors, what's the shark closest to the boat? So is it the menacing shark from Jaws, or is it the cute baby shark from Baby Shark? And the way to think about it as a decision tree and what we're thinking about from an economic perspective, there's a few decision notes to consider. So one, and the most immediate thing, is how this banking crisis evolves, right? And the role that the Fed plays there. And I would argue, it's not systemic. There's actually a lot that policy has done, and that is more kind of idiosyncratic in nature. But it's not a 0% probability, so we need to be mindful of that. The second decision node is around inflation. So does inflation stay sticky high, continue to move higher? Does that push the Fed's hand, or does inflation moderate? Along those lines, our view, as I mentioned, we do believe inflation moderates. So we are sitting in the more kind of baby shark camp, if you will, where we do have some form of recession, but I would argue more mild in nature, and you have an economy that actually proves much more resilient in nature. So with that was my attempt within 20 minutes. I went a little over. Just a brief view of the world, how policy is evolving, and most importantly, how technology is actually playing a really meaningful role in changing the fabric of the economy. So it's really, really fascinating to see that evolve, and for us to be here with all of you. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Great. We're going to keep moving and really thinking about the state of the industry. We started out with some of that thinking. We had a great overview from Shayan from BlackRock about the economy and where it's going. When the Technology Association of Georgia launched 24 years ago, our technology landscape looked a lot different then. We were not starting from zero. The Georgia Scientific Atlanta was at its peak, and Georgia Tech was pioneering cybersecurity. Chris Klaus had just founded ISS in 1994, and there are many other success stories that laid the foundation for further success. Well, today, things look much different. Georgia's economy is driven by technology today, and we have been ranked the #1 place to do business an unprecedented 9 years in a row. No other state in the country has ever done that. We continue to drive innovation in cybersecurity, fintech, digital health, digital media, film, music, and more, and other leading-edge sectors. And we are seeing ourselves leading in data science and analytics that are laying the foundations for artificial intelligence and machine learning. Today, Georgia is known as a top 5 state for technology, and we continue to be recognized really as a global hub of innovation. Today, almost every major technology company has a presence in Georgia, and their names and logos have transformed our skyline. We have had great exits recently, including MailChimp, Cabbage, Pardot, AirWatch, and SalesLoft, and we boast the most highly skilled and diverse technology workforce in the United States, and that is our superpower. With great power, there is great responsibility, and in Georgia, that means opportunity. Today, whoever leads the race for talent has a competitive advantage, and Georgia already has a leg up. At TAG, we have some exciting initiatives that will keep Georgia at the forefront of technology, and I'd like to share some of those with you. So at first, I'd like to go ahead and recognize and see if I get a couple colleagues to join me on stage. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Loretta Daniels to the stage to tell us more about TAG Bridge Builders. TAG Bridge Builders is a program that we started just 2 years ago that really does focus on social justice and equity and how we can make sure that everybody in Georgia is benefiting from the great prosperity that we've all been enjoying. This specifically has a focus on Black talent, Black technologists, and how they can advance both within the corporate world but also as great entrepreneurs and founders. Loretta?
Thank you, Larry. Thank you guys for welcoming me. Just wanted to share a little bit more details about TAG Bridge Builders. It really is a very unique program. It's really designed to make sure that we're creating pathways for generational wealth. And what is generational wealth? It gives an opportunity for individuals to gain and acquire income through opportunity and equity. And this is what TAG Bridge Builders is all about. Our goal is to impact 1,000 lives in the next 5 years. And the major focus is on Black tech talent, specifically here in Georgia. And our goal is to make sure that we are covering 2 or 3 areas. Basically, how do we make sure that we have pathways to get into the workforce? How do we make sure we're advancing them to leadership positions? And how do we help entrepreneurs gain resources to have successful businesses? And so what we've done is we've just taken these approaches. Number one, when it comes to Black tech talent, our goal is to make sure that we're helping companies and helping organizations to hire Black tech talent. So we've developed it's an instrument called a resume database. It's a Black tech talent resume database. And we are collecting resumes from HBCUs, from universities, from tech associations, so that now there's a strategy that's being met. So these companies can go directly into that database to get and tap into very qualified Black tech talent. And then when it comes to advancing in the workplace, this is a very, very difficult subject because a lot of times where you walk into an organization, you'll see a lot of diversity at the middle level, some at the lower level, but you don't see a lot at senior level. And so what we've done is we've tried to make sure that we are covering this problem and taking care of it. And here's what you see. The average person of color is in a position in the mid-level anywhere from 5 to 7 years, where they're seeing their counterparts move every 2 years. And so what we've done is we've addressed the problem by succession planning. The succession plan that we've developed that works with corporations is we help to eliminate social capital and bias. That prevents advancement. And so our goal is to help them to go from mid-level to senior level positions. We also have a Black tech talent mentorship program. This program is designed for middle management to be mentored by senior level management. And finally, when it comes to entrepreneurs, our goal is to give them access to acquire customers. And we do this through TAG Connect. It's a really fun event. It's like a Shark Tank event. Our first one was so successful. So we have sellers. These are Black tech entrepreneurs selling and presenting directly to buyers. These are corporations, so that they now can access their customer database. They can get contracts through vendors, through vendor applications. And then we have TAG Invest Connect. This is another opportunity, and it'll be once a year, where we are gathering together investors, whether they're angel investors or VC firms, so they can take a look at these entrepreneurs and they're interested in investing in their businesses. This is how we're making a difference. And finally, through scholarship, we have a TAG scholarship that helps to advance education and resources for entrepreneurs. And I want to thank all of our Bridge Builder sponsors and advisors. We couldn't do it without you all. We couldn't do it without your investment. So I really appreciate your support. Thank you.
Thank you, Loretta. As you know, the state of technology in Georgia is strong. Thanks to the greatest resources of our state, Georgia is now home to more than 14,000 technology companies and nearly 280,000 technology professionals like yourselves. In addition, our state produces the most tech workers in the nation, degrees Georgia's schools each year. And our capital city of Atlanta is leading the way and ranks in the top 5 cities for technology-related jobs in the nation. This year alone, we have seen an 8.1% increase in tech workers. TAG-Ed is proud to be your leading resource for technology talent. Today, TAG-Ed provides exposure through a wide variety of programs such as internships, innovation challenges, talent acquisition open houses, training, certifications, and professional development through mentorships and pathways to leadership. The Pathways to Leadership program enables high potentials to receive tailored advice from seasoned professionals. But that's not all. Tag Ed has partnered and won one of the nation's largest grants with Georgia Tech and the US EDA to create an AI tech corridor for manufacturing in Georgia. The grant will run for 4 years, and we will partner with such entities as Georgia Tech, UGA, Rice, and others. Through these initiatives and more, TAG and TAG Ed look forward to witnessing the emergence of a new era of tech leaders in Georgia and beyond. I hope that you will take advantage of TAG Ed's opportunities and leverage our organization to grow and thrive in Georgia's technology ecosystem. Thank you.